We can get started. Okay. Last time we saw the gentlemen, Peter, James, John, and Jesus. They had just come down from the mountain, from Mount of Transfiguration, and they started talking about Elijah. And they were wanting to know, well, when's Elijah going to come? And Jesus explained to him, well, in a way, Elijah's already came in the form of John the Baptist. And we learned last week the whole purpose of Elijah coming before Christ was to prepare the way for Christ. So it was John the Baptist before Jesus' first coming, and before his second coming, it will in fact be Elijah will return to earth and prepare the way. Otherwise, Jesus might get here and people just haven't been thinking about God and Jesus, so they need to prepare the way. But Jesus really wanted them to focus on the fact that he soon was going to suffer and die, and that he was going to be turning the church over to them to lead. So he was really trying to just get them to focus as to what was coming now. Now, we know in the future is going to be Jesus coming back again to establish his kingdom, but he needed them to be present in what was going on. Sometimes we get so interested in the future, we don't keep our mind on the present, and we miss out on some things. And we missed out serving Jesus as he wants us to, because he has us here for this time. For, as he told Esther, for such a time as this. And Jesus realized he had very little time to spend with them now. His time is getting close. So he wanted them to focus. So in a nutshell, what the Bible is telling us is that we need to walk by faith. And walk by faith means walk daily in faith, in the moment. Whatever we're doing, it is with the being very aware that we are standing in God's presence and we are functioning with him on the journey. To live every day in the presence is knowing that God is at work in and through you to glorify himself. And we'll acknowledge, we all acknowledge our eternity is secure. But sometimes we get so caught up in this world, we forget to acknowledge he's ruling right now, today, in my life. And the question is, do we think enough about how God contributes to our daily plan? So, Matthew 17:14.
When they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him, saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he's a lunatic and very ill, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him.
Okay. Mark gives us a little bit more detail about the story, so let's go ahead and read that too. Okay. Mark 9:14.
When they came back to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. Immediately, when the entire crowd saw him, they were amazed and began running up to greet him. And then he asked them, What are you discussing with them? And one of the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought you my son, possessed with a spirit which makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and he foams at the mouth and grinds his teeth and stiffens out. I told your disciples to cast it out, and they could not.
Okay. So, Mark helps us understand a little bit more on what's going on there. Mark says the scribes were arguing with the crowd. Probably the scribes were arguing with Jesus' disciples. And Jesus is coming in and seeing this scene and wants to know what's going on here. So he asked the crowd to explain what was going on. Both Mark and Matthew tell us that there was a demon-possessed boy on the scene, that his father had brought him there. And Mark describes that his possession is that he foams in the mouth, he grinds his teeth, he stiffens his body, he has seizure-like symptoms, and the boy had become mute. So The demon would also compel the child to throw himself into fire and the water, presumably to kill the child. And we already know that when a demon wants out of somebody, he tries to get them to kill themselves, and he torments them either mentally or physically. And we know that demons are fallen angels, and they don't mind getting rid of the body themselves, but they don't want to be cast out, because then they kind of lose their pride, I guess. They got cast out instead of they chose to kill the body so they could get out. But anyway, we know that what Satan does is he comes to kill, steal, and destroy, and that's exactly what he was doing to that family, to that child. His tactic, one of their tactics is to occupy human bodies. They are not able to possess believers, though, only unbelievers. And then to destroy whatever they possess, slowly, perhaps, just to torment, all the while taking attention away from the boy, the family, the father, stealing the father's joy of his child, seeking to kill the child, trying to strike fear into onlookers. We learned before that a spirit body cannot leave. A spirit can't leave. A demon spirit cannot just leave a body when it gets ready to. The body has to die, or God has to get the spirit out of the body. So they're caught until they are freed, either by the death of the body or by being delivered. Well, they don't consider themselves delivered, but the body being delivered by God. So they're bound to that body as long as the body remains alive. Then they can move to another host if the body dies. That's much like our spirit. If you think about it, how long does our spirit remain in our body? Until we die. So death is what makes the spirit, gives it ability to move. Now, the demon doesn't mind torturing the person he's possessed in order to make them kill themselves. They just give torment any way they can. Demons possess people to show their opposition to God because that's one of God's greatest creations. So if they can overtake that body, it's like they feel like they've accomplished something. They're demonstrating power and, of course, destroying things. So ultimately, the purpose of the demonic possession is to undermine the faith of God's people and to show that there's other power and authority. Now, we all know that it's not as strong as God's, but, if you weren't a believer and you saw the power of a demon, you would respect that power. And I dare say we should respect that power, not that we would honor it, but understand it is powerful. In verse 16, Jesus brought the son to the man brought his son to the disciples, hoping that they could remove the demon. And the father assumed that the disciples possessed the same power to heal as Jesus did. And we know that exorcism was not uncommon in these days. Certain people had been given the power to exorcise demons. So the father brought them to the disciples and wanted him to cast them out. What we come on is this scene where the disciples have been unable to cast out this demon. So the scribes are over there going, well, that's because da-da-da-da-da. They're just tearing down the whole situation. They suggest that the disciples' failure to cast out the demon triggered the argument, well, that's because Jesus is not really the Messiah. They don't really have any power, which is interesting because what did they really say about Jesus' power, these scribes? Came from Satan. Yeah, so they're talking out of both sides of their mouths. The rabbis of Jesus' day recognized that Jesus had done a messianic miracle when he did cast out the demon from the deaf mute. Now, I did a little research on this because this person is only mute. But apparently the word for deaf and mute in Greek are the same word. So it's hard to know if that individual was actually deaf and mute or just mute. Mute seems to be the key word when I looked at different, I tried to look up different possessions, and mute seems to be the thing that people could not address without God doing it. Of course, in every case, God does it if a demon's removed, but the Messianic miracle involved mutes, and the last one we studied was a deaf mute. So that's the only time in the Bible I think that you'll find deaf mute is that one time, but you do find mute a few other times. Okay, so we know that who could cast out a demon that is mute? Anybody? Everybody? And that was really the question. That's really what's got this all up in the air, because prior to this time, Jesus had sent out the 70 disciples. Do y'all remember that? Mm-hmm. And he sent them all out to witness and to deliver people from demons and do all kinds of miracles. And so they assumed that they could cast out this demon of this mute young man. However, they obviously could not, and that's why we have this scene going on right here. We also know that we were told that only the Messiah could cast out certain demons. And now we're going to, instead of me saying deaf mute, I'm going to say a mute person, a mute demon. And do y'all remember why mute would have an effect on the ability to cast out demons? Yeah. What did you say?
They couldn't say their name.
Because they couldn't say their name, and that was the way that the men were given to exorcise a demon, was to call them by name and cast them out. That's exactly right. So, let's see. So the rabbis knew that only Jesus could cast out a mute demon, but when they were asked, is that what happened? Of course, they said, no, devil cast them out, and to everybody. So that was their witness to the crowd, was the devil did it, not Jesus. They even asked whether Jesus could be the son of David when they saw that happen, and of course we know that he was, but still they denied that. So here we have just another confrontation of trying to tear down who is Jesus and what can he do. The disciples made the mistake of presuming they could do whatever Jesus could do because of their association with Jesus. So they thought they could cast out this demon. And that might be an easy mistake for us to make. We may assume that we can do some things because we're following in the ministry of Jesus. And we may assume that we can, when, unless Jesus specifically gives us that power, we can't. And actually, more than him giving us a power, it's more likely we give him ourselves and he does stuff through us, not giving us the gift to cast out a demon, okay? I'm not saying he can't do that. I'm just saying more likely these days Jesus works through us.
He gave his disciples that power.
He gave them
to do like healing and
he did that to those 70 for that period of time, and we have no idea if that included healing a mute demon. I'm going to guess it didn't. That's my assumption. I don't have anything to base that on except my own thinking.
Like Tim was saying, one of the requirements was to call them by name.
Right. So. Right. So that's, yeah. So I'm going to guess that perhaps they couldn't do a mute demon, but they could do other demons that didn't cause that to happen. Okay, Luke 10:17.
The 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name.
Okay, so see, when they got back from that missionary trip, they were super excited. They had seen some powerful things going on, so they thought they had that ability. And you know that you know how good it feels when you see God at work, and then if you get to be a part of it. Have you ever prayed for someone specifically and then you see God grant the request? Have you ever given someone a verse and they go, that's exactly the verse that I heard yesterday, or, you know, I was praying about today, and you know that God is at work. He is giving those messages. So it's wonderful and encouraging and uplifting to be able to communicate and God just verify, yeah, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what you're thinking about. We're on the same page. It's good to be on the same page with God. That's what it means to walk in the Spirit. The inner thrill that we feel when we do what Jesus asks us to do and then watch Him show up and continue. See God at work. It builds our faith. It encourages us. It whets our appetite to serve Jesus more. We enjoy serving the Master and pleasing Him. Now, it can also open us up for pride, you know, like, well, look what God did through me, or, you know, and so we always have to be careful of that. And, you know, it's a hard line for this reason. We want to minister the best possible ministry. You know, like, if I'm teaching this lesson, I really want to teach it the best I possibly can. I fall short every time, but it doesn't keep me from wanting to, you know. And then if I get a compliment, it's like, okay, I can't let that go to my head. You know what I'm saying? But y'all hear what I'm saying? So it is a fine line. I think of preachers. Preachers are in a hard spot because of course they want to do a good job. Of course they want a pat on the back. And of course Satan wants to take that and mess them up, you know, and so it's a fine line. We just need to be aware of where we're at, and if we find ourselves in our head too much, confess it and get back on our knees. Back where we belong. So their earlier success have led them to believe they could, you know, cast out any demon. Luke 10:18.
And he said to them, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning.
Okay, Jesus is talking there, and he's talking about when they were on their missionary trip. And what he's really saying is, I saw what y'all did in defeating Satan's kingdom. And, you know, you got him, you know. And so it was kind of like a high five to him. Y'all did what you were supposed to, and I could see Satan being pulled out of heaven. So again, you know, they saw that and they experienced that and they thought they could continue. Whenever we serve Jesus in the power He gives us, we are participating in the defeat of Satan. And it's one spiritual victory at a time, one soul at a time. Jesus says our successes bring Satan down, and that's what He's talking about. Our successes in the fighting this war is to bring Satan down. The key here is that it's not we who are defeating Satan. It's Jesus through us. And that's what I meant a while ago about it's really Him, what He does through us more than what He tells us and we perform. Jesus had told them to cast out demons, and they did that to a certain amount of success for sure. But here we are in a whole new situation that they're no longer on their missionary journey. We also know there's times that Jesus asks us to do something. Every time Jesus asks us to do something, we're going to be successful, right? No. Jesus wasn't even successful every time He went out to save someone. You know, that's not how it works on earth.
When was he not?
Huh?
When was he not?
How about Judas? Just one. How about the whole nation of Israel? That they were not, you know.
I thought you meant Jesus. For the nation of, well
when I say He wasn't successful, I mean He did not succeed in winning people to Him.
Okay.
That's what I mean by that. Now, Jesus knew that coming to the earth. He knew that everybody wasn't going to turn to Him. So here's the deal. We're not going to be successful every time we do something in the name of the Lord. But I can guarantee you will not be successful if you don't do it through the power of the Lord, period. Okay? And I can also guarantee that it has to be God working through us, not us doing it and going, okay, Father, bless this, you know, I thought I'd see the sentence that says that more succinctly, but I'm not seeing it. But let's look at Luke 10:19.
Okay. Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing will injure you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are recorded in heaven.
Okay, so Jesus is talking to his disciples. He's letting them know that when he gives them the authority, things are going to happen. But they don't need to keep their eyes on this authority or this gift that they have been given. They need to keep their eyes on what's important, that their names have been written in heaven. And so if God does choose to do something and he chooses to allow us to participate with him, that's wonderful, and we're going to get so much from it. But it's not as important as our salvation, our eternity. And
It's almost, like I was just thinking, if God would give me the power to expel demons or whatever, and it would really work, I wouldn't know what to do with that authority. I wouldn't know. It's almost like I would say, oh, never mind, I'll just be this person that follows you, because with that comes a lot of balancing responsibility. I don't know, there's a hard one.
And a lot of battle, and a
too
lot
much
of
for God to work through
Continual
you
battle,
and not-
yeah.
continual battle,
Right.
and hey, just because he gives you these gifts, Satan still has power and can harm you. Okay, I mean, think of missionaries that are out on the field that are harmed, they're killed. That doesn't mean God wasn't with them. It just is the game. It is, when I say the game, it is the spiritual battle. It gets physical sometimes, I guess.
For me, you could be like Benny Hinn, that he can,
Heal all those people.
not that he could do it, but the Holy Spirit does.
I think,
It was more to me a show than anything, but, that's satanic, but
yeah,
you could get, if you could do it, would you boast about it, or would you be,
Humble.
humble with it, or would you
and would
make
God,
money with it?
would God be a part of that? Would God be, so all this that they were doing, it was, now, I'm going to say something that it was said in the Bible about Jesus, but I think even in the Bible it says that Satan disguises himself as the morning star. So he can disguise all of this,
He can.
things that are happening, as the people are being misled by
Mm.
the groves,
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's whenever they go to these called meetings, or services or whatever, and when they doing stuff like that, I think that's satanic, and they throwing themselves all over the floor, and and they get slain in the spirit and stuff. That's not
It's almost too much for show.
right. I mean, when I was going to New Life, Assembly of God, when I was younger, there's this old man. I mean, in this choir. I mean, they're beautiful. Look, it was good songs, good music, good song leader. But he in the choir, this old man was just standing there singing. All of a sudden, he just fell out. He fell out like a piece of like a post or something, knocking his head on the wall. And everybody just kept singing, and you heard it above all that music. You heard his head, and they looked at him and just kept singing. That's just the Holy Spirit. I was like, they need to check on that. That's not God. That I couldn't explain. Anyway,
I hear you.
Well,
Well, any success in ministry has the potential to deceive our hearts, okay? Thinking that we're something special. And that's why Jesus chose us. And that's certainly not it at all. The disciples did not need to rejoice that the demonic spirits were subject to them, but they needed to rejoice that Jesus was using them to accomplish his purposes. And then Jesus just reminded them, be glad, rejoice that your names are recorded in heaven. Rejoice in the saving work of Jesus, who made us a part of that royal priesthood and caused us to serve him. Rejoice in the work of Jesus for you, not your works for Jesus. How about that? Now, again, it does make us excited and, encourage us when he allows us to work with him, but that's not, again, not the most important thing. Seeing that the disciples tried and failed to perform a miracle does not even particularly mean that Jesus was upset with them. Now, in this case, he was, and there's a reason why. But you're not going to be successful every time you do something for God, okay? And it doesn't mean God's not with you unless you're just kind of doing it on your own. Let's go ahead and look at the next couple of verses.
Okay. And Jesus answered and said, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once.
Now, y'all, I have never understood these verses in context based on what I learned about these verses. I thought when Jesus said, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? I thought he was talking to his disciples.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought that.
I did too.
But that, according to our study, is not who he's talking to. He's talking to the crowd. He's talking to the ones that denied that he had the power to exorcise a demon. And he's talking to the scribes. So that's who he's talking to when he calls them unbelieving. And that should have been the clue that it wasn't the disciples. But I was thinking unbelieving, like not having enough faith.
Because the disciples couldn't do it. So
Right.
I thought, yeah, I did too.
And so it was kind of nice to see these verses from a different view. And then he said, he rebuked, bring him here to me. And then he rebuked him, and the demon came out of the boy at once. He was cured at once. So Jesus reacts to this scene. He's very frustrated. He may not have even have done anything with this demon had the disciples not messed it up first by acting like they could get rid of the demon. But because they did that, he had to set the record straight as to what was really happening. The reason I said he may not have even exorcised this demon is because this was not at a time he was doing things unless people had faith. Well, the Father didn't really have faith except in what he'd heard, and that's that he heard that Jesus cast out a demon. But who did they give the credit to when Jesus cast out? Who did Israel give the credit to when Jesus cast out that demon? Satan. Yeah. So in fact, is the Father coming to Jesus? He doesn't care if it's Satan's power or God's power. Just get that demon.
Yeah.
Y'all, do we ever do that? And it's easy to do that. We don't care what it takes. We need to get this situation fixed. Yeah. We don't care if God does it or Satan does it. We just need to get this situation fixed. And I'm putting it in those words, but in better words is, even if I have to pay $1,000, $20,000, I'm getting this situation fixed. I'm gonna put it like that rather than saying,
right.
Because there's times when we are going to get that situation fixed. And so whose agenda are we on? Our agenda. And
well, and going back, it seems like in the Messianic scriptures there was something about that's how Israel would know that Jesus was the Messiah, because he would be the only one. So I thought maybe that scripture is what he was fussing about, them not knowing that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
On that. But this changes it all.
Okay. So, he calls this generation unbelieving because this crowd is unbelieving. Mm-hmm. The scribes are unbelieving. When he cast out the mute demon previously, they recognized that he could be the Messiah, but the Pharisee says, no, he's getting his power from demons. So from that point on, Jesus didn't embrace that's where he's getting power, but he understood that's what they thought. And so then the crowd turns to Jesus' disciples, expecting them to perform the same miracle. Well, if they thought Jesus got his power from Satan, who did they think the disciples got their power from?
Yeah.
Had to be from Satan. And did they care? No, here they are pursuing the disciples to be healed, and they don't care where the power's coming from. They just want the healing. And that's what I said. There's sometimes we get in the same motion. We just want the miracle. We just want what we want. And we're not paying attention to where the power is coming from. So,
I wonder if, since the disciples had tried to heal the boy, they didn't require them to have faith first before.
well, it's kind of, well, it's not that. No, those disciples that God sent out, he gifted them with the ability to do miracles and cast out demons. So they had faith. They were his kids.
But I mean, the people they were healing.
Oh, no, that was in the beginning, and I say the beginning, the beginning of the ministry. And no, they were out there just to proclaim God, Messiah, and no, they weren't required to have faith.
After the 12th verse, then he was mostly, you had to have faith.
You had to have faith, yeah. So
So
this was before that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know the way it's written, it's
It's not always in chronological
not quite,
order.
Yeah, okay.
Just
Thanks
to
for
not be
clearing that up.
confusing.
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's see where we're at on the notes. I think I've covered a lot of that already.
The second thing, yeah.
They were willing to work. Okay, we said they're willing to get the power no matter where it came from. Now then Jesus expresses his disgust because their unbelief and their willingness to bargain with the devil. You know, we'll do whatever it takes to get what we want done. And then he says, how long will I put up with you? And again, he's talking to the crowd. He's not talking to his disciples at this point. However, he is frustrated with his disciples because they have opened up Pandora's box. Because they tried to perform a miracle, and because they believe they could, they're kind of participating in the Pharisees' deception because they're trying to perform a miracle that only Jesus can do. They know that Jesus has been accused of using Satan power to do it, so they're kind of playing into that, probably more out of ignorance than anything else. Probably thinking, well, we were able to cast out demons, and I don't know why we can't do it now. It doesn't have any expression that they even thought about this demon being a mute. Okay, that's not even brought out in their thinking right here. So they were basically trying to do ministry on their own power rather than in the power of Christ. We know that if we try to do ministry in our own power, we will ultimately fail. Oh, God might let us have success like a Benny Hinn or like some of these preachers. I mean, from the world's view, they have success, but that doesn't mean they have success in spiritual terms. And the efforts are worthless for eternity. But if we really are serving the risen God and we're trying to do things in our own power, we can tarnish Jesus' reputation. If someone believes if I pray for them, then they're going to be healed. Like there's a couple of ladies at church in this last 2 weeks that have people that I'm not close to that have specifically texted me to pray for them. And I'm almost going like, I don't mind praying for them, but I don't want them to think that I have any special power of prayer, because I don't. I mean, by any stretch of any imagination. Have I had that at some point? There's been a situation or two where I'd say, yeah, God allowed that, but that's not my spiritual gift that, and I don't want them to feel that way. And I mean, it's almost like I back up from it because I'm thinking, I'm nothing special. I'm just a prayer.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And I know y'all know how that feels.
Oh, yeah.
And
well,
so
I think you just turning it that situation back over to God is humbling yourself. That,
Yeah.
I think He would reward that.
Well,
No.
yeah. So, anyway, it kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm praying for them though. No, because I want to pray for them.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right. We introduced, let's see, doubt in the minds of others. So if they think that we have some kind of quote unquote ability for God to use us in a certain way, and then if we fail, who do they blame? They might blame us, but they really blame God, and it discounts God's power. And so that's really what the disciples had done. They had unbeknowingly got caught up in believing they could do something through the power of God, but they were kind of doing it on their own, not in God's power. So they weren't doing the right thing.
That's, your issue is kind of like even just having someone ask you to pray for them, and you really don't even know where they stand. If they believe right or not, and
well, that too, because one of them was for cancer, and they'd heard a couple of the testimonies I've given recently about cancer, and I mean, has God been at work in this family with cancer and our friends? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean He's at work in their situation.
Right.
Yes, of course I'll pray for them.
But
that's right. And each walk is different.
Let me make something clear. No matter how close you walk to God, you could be up there and have 1,000 crowns. If God doesn't want to do it, He's not going to do it.
That's right.
So
that's very clear.
It's
very clear.
He's wanting you to learn something from it, or
whatever the case is. We don't even know that.
Yeah.
Yep.
All we know is He says yes and He says
He
no.
says yes and He says no. That's all.
And we can trust Him, whether it's a yes or a no.
That's right. And that's what faith is.
Yes. Yes.
Whether He says yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
But just to make that clear.
Yes, ma'am.
So Jesus did rebuke the demon, did cast him out without knowing, by the way, without knowing the boy's name. He never asked it. Okay, He just cast him out because Jesus can. And so Jesus had to do that to restore His testimony that He could cast out a mute demon. So that's the reason He healed him, probably more than any other thing. He was clearing up his reputation. Yeah, I am the Messiah, therefore I can do this. So we can expect Jesus, like you said, Kim, to get His work done His way, and in a way that God receives glory. Let's see. Jesus always wins, but we may lose if we don't walk with Him in the Spirit, of course. Mark 9:20.
They brought the boy to Him. When He saw him, immediately the Spirit threw him into a convulsion, and falling to the ground, he began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And he asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. It has often thrown him before, both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the boy's father cried out and said, I do believe. Help my unbelief.
Okay.
I have no problem with that.
Well, we're going to talk about all those things.
I hope so, because every time I come to that, I either feel like there's something in between the lines that I'm not seeing.
Well, this passage has thrown me for a loop. Now, not so much the last sentence.
Every time I see that all things are possible. And
yeah, okay, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about another view on these verses than what I've believed all this time. Okay, so let's back up just a minute and talk a little bit about the boy, and then we'll talk about faith and what we're talking about in that. How long has this been happening? Since childhood. And he says, and he throws him into the fire, and he throws him into the water. So what do you think the demon's trying to do when he throws him in fire and water? Just torture him? Maybe, but maybe trying to kill him, because maybe he wants to escape and go to somebody else. So then he says, well, if you can, help us. Well, at this point, the father's saying, well, your disciples couldn't help me, so if you can, help me. And Jesus said, if you can, like,
Yeah.
what do you mean, if I can? I can. And so what Jesus is saying is all things are possible to him who believes. He's talking about himself in this instance. All things are possible for me. And for those who believe that I am the Messiah, well, it's not quite that simple, Kim. Just a minute. Let me read so I don't get that messed up. But I do love the Father's response. And I pray this verse sometimes. I do believe, help my unbelief. Because the truth is, there's times we do believe God can do it. We're not sure whether it's his will to do it,
Yeah.
number one. And number two, sometimes we just don't trust. We just don't trust because it's something that scares us, and we need more trust in God. I don't mean to make it happen. I mean trust either way.
Right.
Okay, I don't mean to make it happen. No. Okay, so let me just read. If I can, all things are possible to him who believes. This man is expressing doubt in Jesus' ability. And what he should not have been expressing that at all, because they knew if they believed he was the Messiah, then they knew he could deliver him from the mute. Okay? So that's what he meant. But if I can, well, if you believe that I'm Messiah, I can. Then you know I can, basically.
Right.
Jesus had done this very miracle before, so that man had every reason to believe that Jesus could deliver him if he believed he was the Messiah. Okay? And
If you will.
yeah, if you will, that's right. That's what Jesus meant when he said, all things are possible for those who believe, as in believe in Jesus. If you believe in Jesus as Messiah, then you know he's God. Therefore, you know he can do anything. Not will, but can do anything. And he absolutely would have known he could have delivered this mute demon. So Jesus offers to do something. If Jesus offers to do something for us, there's no room for doubt. He can. If he says, I can do this for you, Jesus can do it for us. So we need to understand Jesus wasn't saying that we can have anything because we believe we can have it. Jesus is not saying, if you have enough faith, then you're going to get this. That is not what Jesus is saying. And boy, is that ever preached the wrong way.
Yeah.
Because that's not true. As a matter of fact, he goes on to explain why it's not true in the next set of verses, and we'll get to that in a minute. If it were true, then we could do anything we dream up, okay? And that's exactly heresy. That's exactly saying what I believe because I'm a Christian, I get. That's heresy. That's untruth. John 15:5.
I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing.
Okay? So Jesus is making now a point to his disciples. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You were out there thinking you could heal this mute on your own, and you couldn't. And you should have known that, because you disciples should have known that only the Messiah could deliver a mute. But you took it on, well, we healed demons before, and we're doing it now, you know. So they were misrepresenting Jesus. And then the man says, I do believe, help my unbelief. We've all felt that way at times, like that we should trust Jesus more, but part of us is just fearful because it's human life, and we fear and we worry at times rather than trust. It's like I've told my children before, I trust him, but I don't trust y'all. Okay? I don't trust this situation because I don't trust what you're going to do, but I do trust what he can do. Not will do, because I don't always know his will. In our case, probably the times that we're, as believers, when we doubt Jesus, it's because we're not sure what his will is.
Yeah.
Not so much that we don't trust that he has the ability.
No, I know fully well he can do
whatever he deems is best.
Right.
So our problem is we have a different definition of best.
So that's, but, and, you know, a lot, some people would say, well, you don't, you know, because you feel that way, you don't have the faith, and it's not that at all. It's,
I think it takes a lot more faith to trust when the answer is no than when the answer is
well, yeah,
your way.
that's, because that's, you know, to me, that's the definition of faith. But you don't, to ask and get what you want on a regular basis.
Well, that doesn't require faith,
You
does
have enough
it?
faith to ask, but, you know, that is that really faith, or, I don't know, just when you don't get something, even faith in God, believe in the unseen. So it's something you don't have, but you have faith in it, just like you don't.
Well, it's not called faith then, it's really.
Right,
It's
exactly.
called sight. I get what
Yeah.
I want every time I ask God this, I get what I want. Well, that's called sight.
Yeah.
It's not called faith. So again, we wonder what his will is most of the time as believers, and we don't always know his will. And y'all, do you think it's wrong to pray for things when we don't know what his will is? Of course not.
We don't know what his will is.
Exactly. So how,
We
I mean,
have to ask.
you have, and so we have to pray for what, you know, what's laid on our heart, what we're concerned about. Does he want us to hear every one of our concerns and worries, even if it's not his will? He still wants us to come to him with the burden that's on our heart. Or does he want us to forget about it? No. He wants us to come to him. He has something to teach us in and through it. We may not know it for 100 years, or we might know it immediately.
Prayer in itself is coming to him, not just asking him, but sharing the desires of your heart, how you feel, even though he knows it, he desires that relationship. So that's what prayer is, not just asking. So he wants that prayer, and in asking, it may not always be, you know, even to your advantage that you get what you're asking.
Yeah.
But that's what prayer is. It's not just asking.
It's trusting that relationship more than the answer to whatever we're petitioning about. Let's see. So the boy is freed. Jesus has cleared up that he has no faith in that crowd, and they have no faith in him. He's told the disciples, well, he's let the disciples know. Well, no, he's really fixing to let them know why they couldn't cast it out. So let's read that, 17:19.
Okay. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. But this kind does not go out except in prayer and fasting.
Okay, let me clear up the prayer and fasting thing first of all. That could just stand for prayer. It doesn't mean prayer and they had to actually fast food or whatever. Because saying prayer and fasting, according to the few things that I researched, could just mean simply intense prayer. Okay, so who are you praying to if you are intensely praying? You're praying to the Father. So what Jesus basically is saying, this kind doesn't go out unless the Father says it goes out. Okay? So that's what's meant, according to our commentator, by prayer and fasting. It can't go out unless God says it goes out, and he's referring to intense prayer. Okay? So, in other words, unless the Father casts him out, he's not going to go out. Okay? Unless Jesus cast him out, he's not going out, basically. But let's go back up to faith, the size of faith that you must have. And I've never heard this explanation about faith before till I studied this lesson, but I can agree with parts of it for sure. he said, because of the littleness of your faith. Well, and then he goes on to say, but if you had faith just the size of a mustard seed, which they use that because it's such a tiny seed, it's smaller than a BB. So he said, if you just had that much faith, you could move a mountain. So Jesus is not saying you have to have this preponderance of faith or something's not going to happen. That's not what he's saying. Steve explains it as faith is faith. You either have faith or you don't have faith. It's not a size. It doesn't come in a poundage. There's not a weight. You either have faith in God and you're saved, or you don't have faith in God and you're not saved. It's not you have faith the size of a mustard seed and you're saved. Size has nothing to do with it. It is or it's not. And so Jesus says, because the littleness of your faith, faith has an object. And so what he's telling them is, you're putting your faith in little things. Well, what little things had the disciples put their faith in? Themselves. They thought they had the power. They thought they had been given the power, and so they thought they had the power. So the littleness of their faith was, you're putting your faith in little things. Okay? And so if they put their faith in big things like Messiah, meaning to do the work, not to perform the miracle through them, but to do the miracle itself, then, in other words, Jesus would have had to do it. You look confused, Kim. Have I lost you?
Leave it alone, though.
Well,
Leave it alone.
you don't have to leave it alone. Okay. So he says, and I'm just going to read a little bit. Now, how can faith be large or small? The key to interpreting Jesus' words is to remember that faith requires an object. Faith doesn't exist by itself. You have to have an object of your faith. So what's the object of our faith? Jesus Christ. Okay? We could place our faith in something like our bank account, or something else we possess, or we can place our faith in Jesus Christ. If I place my faith in my bank account, I would be placing my faith in something little, the littleness of my faith. I'm not placing it in the Messiah. I could place my faith in the government and depend on the government, or I could place my faith in the Creator. And so if I place my faith in something small, something of little power, then I have little faith, because I'm putting it in something that is worthless.
That makes sense from the scripture.
If I place my faith in something large, then I have great power. I have great faith. Well, there's only one, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one place to have great faith, and that's in God. In government, as powerful as it is on earth, and it is pretty powerful on earth, I'm not placing my faith in government. You know, I'm not placing my faith in man. I mean, we place our faith in one another as fellow believers, but we're going to let each other down sometimes because we're going to mess up. So we're to place our faith in what deserves to have faith. It says, Jesus says, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. You don't have to have strong faith to move a mountain. He didn't say you had to have big faith to move a mountain. He said it could be as little as a mustard seed. In other words, he's saying you just have to have faith in the right thing. It's not a matter of big or small. It's the right thing. And the disciples truly thought, and I think they probably really did think, because he'd been given that privilege to take out demons before, they probably thought, well, I can still do it. Not remembering. Yeah, and not remembering, except for a mute demon, not remembering that little detail, you know. They thought they had the power to do that, but they didn't. It was a messianic miracle. The Father had reserved that specific miracle for his Son as a sign that that was truly Messiah. So we know that was the only way the demon could come out. And as far as the with prayer and fasting, with prayer, did Jesus, you know, with intense prayer, communication from...
Okay, let me see if we can get this right. First of all, it was a messianic
miracle.
So why are they talking about faith at all because it was impossible for them to do.
They forgot about
I think they
Then
thought,
why did he say that? For this goes, why could we not? And then he said, you either have it or you don't. But whether they had it or they didn't, it didn't matter because it couldn't be done by them.
well, he said, he said, you of little faith. He says you placed your faith in something little.
In other words, but still, them having faith in him, they still couldn't have done it.
Oh,
Because
no.
he himself.
Well, and you're right, because, yeah,
So why did he even say this?
I hear what you're saying.
That's what confuses me.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. What do you think of and I can't answer that, I wish I could. What do you think of the overall view of it, though, as far as big faith, little faith?
If you so let's reread this. If you had faith at all, you will say to this mountain, move. it
And
would
he's
move.
saying, if you had faith at all that only the Messiah could do this.
Yeah, I don't see that in there though.
No, but he
But
could have
he was-
intended it as, you know.
But how would we know this in here? And
You know-
this is for us to understand God's word and him speaking to us. So by looking at that,
You don't glean all that from it, and neither did I, and so I looked it up 2 or 3 other places
yeah,
because I thought, okay, is Steve just going out on a wire here, you know?
Yeah.
And I found it in 2 or 3 other places that no, he's not going out on a wire. That Jesus was trying to impart. You have to have faith in the source of the miracle.
so did they just, in the interpretation, confuse the heck out of us?
Oh yeah, and that
Because it's
happened.
not stated like that.
Because I think when he did give them the powers to do anything, they were feeling like that's mine, instead of having it through God.
Yeah, but
Through
even-
Jesus,
But even the
You're saying the
Healing
plain
of the-
reading of
but even in the healing, they could have healed anybody. He gave them that power. But the only thing they did wrong was trying to do something that they couldn't have done in the first place, whether they had faith or not.
You're right.
Or it's not the
Yeah.
fact of enough faith. They could have had all the faith, that they were supposed to have, but it still wouldn't have been done according to
right.
what it says.
So read that again, because I think I almost had it. Almost had an answer to your question.
Read what again?
The scripture.
The mustard seed?
Yeah.
It says, and he said to them, because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, or any faith at all, in other words, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it shall move. And nothing will be impossible to you.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't have it. I thought I might have
I
gleaned
just think
something there.
that if that's what's being said, and you would listen to a few commentaries, I think I would revisit
The original language.
the original language,
Yeah.
because what's coming out here, to me,
doesn't say that. It's the plain language doesn't
Right.
speak that, and I hear you.
It happens like that a lot
Yeah,
in
he's
the Bible.
focusing,
I
it
can
looks like
understand that.
Jesus is focusing on their faith instead of, you couldn't do this because it was
But to
mine,
me, that's
only
just,
for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so why did
that's true.
he
We'd
call
have
it
to
that?
look that up. We'd have to look that up some more and study some more. I don't know. I will say this. We are digging in the word deep, meaning the normal average reader is not gonna pick up on all that. Although that's a verse that many people pick up on, I would say.
But they read it wrong.
Well,
You know,
exactly. They
according
read
to-
it. They read it like
They
if I just had enough faith, if I just got more faith,
And a
then
lot
I
of
can do
people-
anything.
This is one verse that will cause a person to leave the Christ, to turn their back.
Because they didn't get that. Yeah.
Right.
And,
Because it says this, and,
And it
we can,
feels black and white.
yeah.
we can accept that, that the faith can't be in our ability. It has to be in the ability that if we had faith in Jesus enough that he possibly would give us that gift to do whatever, to move a mountain. But it would have to be the faith in Jesus to move that mountain, not
But it still won't happen unless Jesus wants it to happen.
Right.
So if we can have all the faith we want, it still trips
Because-
up a young Christian.
Oh, I agree.
Because
And
they
here-
read this and say, I have faith in you, God. I have faith in you, Lord, that you could do this, and you know, and it's still not happened. It's not them that they're not asking themselves, or they're not trying to do something through their power. You know what I'm saying? But according to this, if they read this and say,
If you had
okay,
faith
well,
enough, then you could move that mountain.
yeah, and then if I have faith enough in God, and then it comes to the extent to where a person says, well, what am I doing wrong because I have the faith? What?
All I could
You know,
add
you
is,
could
and
see it,
rely
you
on
could
him
give
to
up.
do it. Yeah, if I had faith enough and relied on him to do it, then the mountain would move. You know, if I put
Yeah.
it, if I add those 3 words and rely on him to do it, then he'll do it. But here's what I'm going to say. We are digging deep.
Yeah,
And, it's not
and that's a very sensitive spot for me.
well, yes,
You know,
and I know why.
Not just Mike, not just Mike, but, and it's so
Trust.
funny, but just the other day I was, you know, listening to some kind of sermon, or I was listening to the Bible as I drove or something, and I came upon that, and it's like, God, if I'm misunderstanding something, I was angry, you know, help me to understand what, so now here we are talking about it and stuff.
Right. We haven't deciphered it all the way, but we are talking about it.
It's still like praying for somebody you're not certain where they're at, and you don't want them to think, well, I'm praying and it's gonna happen because I'm strong in prayer.
Right.
Right.
That's kind of the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah,
because
So it's like,
it
Well,
wasn't
and-
God decides to give you.
I think we have the understanding, but making the scripture match our understanding is very
Exactly.
hard. Because to me, we have the right understanding. If we have faith that Jesus is Messiah, can do anything he wants to do, and we rely on him to do it, he can move the mountain.
and there's two different, we're on two different, planes here. We're talking about if we believe in him, you know, the struggle in here is saying, if we believe or have faith enough in him, then anything we ask should happen. But then the other one again is, why did he even tell his disciples that they could have done it if they had
Faith enough.
it when they couldn't have? So there's two different
Yeah, angles to it.
angles to it.
We need Daryl on this one.
Yeah.
I like Daryl to
Yeah,
into that.
get into it, yeah.
But anyway, I'm sorry for
No,
it.
it's
No,
okay,
no,
because
that's
the
good.
truth is, I get to teach this again Sunday, and it helps me to be better prepared for, you know,
Yeah.
thoughts. I don't have the answer, obviously. But no, I want to hear it brought up, because it'll come up again, you know, even in just my mind later on as I'm thinking about it. So it's something to ask God about. Okay. Instead of placing trust in ourselves or our faith, and I will say that sometimes we place our trust in our faith rather than in God's will, then a little is going to be accomplished. A little faith accomplishes nothing if we've chosen the wrong object of our faith. Well, if we choose something other than Jesus, of course it's not going to come to fruition. So they had to place their faith in something great like God. And he would be the one that could move the mountain. God, because he can do literally anything. So we may be getting down to understanding and knowing the will of God. Also, that's in there too, because we could place our faith in our trust that Jesus is going to do something, but if it's not his will, like you said, it's not his will, and he's not doing it. And we can't wish him into it, or, you know, it's his will or it's not his will. And if the mountain were to move, it wouldn't be us anyway. And I mean, that kind of contradicts those words as well, because if the mountain were to move, never would it have been because you and I even had faith enough to make the mountain move, because we don't have that power. Only God has that power. So, yep, requires further study. The crowd placed their faith in Satan, or whoever had enough power to heal somebody. The Father placed his faith in the disciples, and they placed their faith in themselves. And as a result, it discounted Jesus' witness, because Jesus was the only one who could carry it out. What we depend upon for the power and authority to serve Jesus will determine the fruitfulness of our walk. Now, if we are dependent on Jesus, even then we're not 100% that what we're having our faith in is going to come about, because again, what's God's will in this situation?
Teaching us something.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe he's simply saying, instead of saying faith, instead of realizing you couldn't do it because you thought you could, but no, he directs it to them, never mind.
I don't know. Maybe, Father, you'll help us get to the bottom of this
Yeah.
before we die. Maybe not.
I was thinking, maybe he said, your faith, not your faith in me would do it, but you knowing that I was the only one that could do it.
And that could very well, that would make sense.
Then I would do it. Like saying, no, I can't, but my Father can. Or Jesus can, and that's it.
But I know someone that can. I can't do it, but I know
So
someone can. If you put your faith in the someone that can.
Yeah, maybe that would make that make
And
sense.
and these conversations lately, we have found out what's spoken and written is not what is meant. And we have no way to find that unless we go to the original language or do study like we're digging in right now.
Mike has a book that translates. You could see the Hebrew or the whatever language, and then it
Shows in English.
right. On
and
top
even
of
then,
that, it's right, and then even then, whatever word they chose to put there, but it helps maybe a little bit on my.
but how about this? Even then, you also kind of have to know the customs of that day to understand what that meant. This this very sentence may be something that they grew up on and they understood it to mean something.
Just the large and the small.
Yeah, because for us, we're sizing it.
Yeah.
And that's not what
That's not what he's talking about. It's a different context.
yeah. So, I'm sure it's the truth. I just don't know how it's the truth. And that's my final word. Okay, Philippians 2:12.
So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is working you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure.
And of course, God wants us to take all these things. And when it says work out our salvation, is there any way you and I can work out our salvation?
Work it out with him. In other words,
Put it in his hands.
yeah.
And that may be the same thing as
And
move the mountain. Let him move that mountain in us.
Because if he was move a mountain, well, who would be glorified? I mean, there's no, it's not going to be no mountain move, but could be possible. He can do it. But
who would get
Who would get the glory? For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and work for his good pleasure. And so that's what it's all about. It's easy.
You know what? In some mountains, they have been moved.
They have
And
it.
you're cancer, he's on his way.
Right. To me, that's
And
the
you're
mountain.
healing, everybody has their own little mountain.
It was a figurative.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
but those mountains or things in our lives.
Anything.
Well, and really in the few sentences before, when they said, what did they say before? A few sentences before, if you had faith to move the mountain.
Is it in here?
Yeah, it's about, and it talks about small, it's when we refer to small.
He said, this is Matthew 17:19. The disciples came to him and said, why could we not drive it out? And he said unto them, because of the littleness of your faith, for I truly say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you.
Because that's really not talking about the size of their faith. It's talking about if you have the faith in the man who can,
Yeah.
then it's going to happen.
So maybe that's what he was telling the disciples, and where
It,
it
and
wasn't
it's
the
going
fact
on,
that whether they could or not, it was who to go to get it done.
and that's what the commentary that I read said. It's not a matter of size of faith, it's a matter of the object of your faith, and in all times, the object of our faith is Jesus.
So
And
they,
so,
they
and they
chose
were thinking
themselves to try to
at
do
that
it,
time,
when
right,
they should
at
have
that
known
time, they
better.
were relying on themselves, so.
So that question, hopefully,
well, I understand the confusion.
Call out, though, a lot of times I just take things as they are.
I'm
So I
gonna-
enjoy that.
I'm going to sign us out since we're all clear, not, but we can, I mean, hopefully God will revisit this and enlighten us on this, if you will, Father, but if not, we'll get it in heaven. So let me end us on that.
a lot of times